Oh, there we go. Brilliant. Okay, so as I said, we're going to cover some conf information for you today. We're going to first of all start with a generalized conf review. We're then going to move on to Mission Control, Splunk's new security operations platform, and then Ilias is going to share with us the latest and greatest updates in Phantom. So before we get started, just a couple of house rules. These tend to apply mostly when we have physical events, but I need to cover them anyway. These are generally technical based presentations. Sometimes they are high level just due to the content that we've got available, but this isn't a sales presentation. We're not trying to convert anyone here. This is an inclusive environment. Please be kind to one another, be kind in the chat, be kind when you ask questions. The presenters here are giving up their time for you to hopefully pass on something useful. And finally, we're led by technology. Obviously, this is a Splunk focused user group. We do obviously sometimes talk about other technologies or adjacencies, but this is fundamentally going to be around Splunk. So if you're not interested in Splunk, this may not be the session for you. And handing over to Andrew. Andrew, go for it. If Andrew's there. Oh.
I should have unmuted.
There we go. Yep, can hear you now. Take it away.
Yeah. Right. My audio might be a bit laggy according to some tests we did earlier, but yeah. So this is just going to be a brief recap of everything that was discussed at .conf. I took the week off for this, so
Andrew, I don't know if you're still speaking, but you're not coming through on this end.
Days. Pardon?
Oh, you're back. Sorry.
You might want to disable your camera if you're
okay.
having upload issues.
Still with us, Andrew?
Right. Sorry about that. My wife. Can you still see the presentation screen?
Yep, presentation screen and audio is coming through loud and clear at this end.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. My Wi-Fi decides to drop out every one. Yeah. Let's just continue. So conf took place in October this year. There were quite a lot of virtual events because obviously you can't go to the experience them in person. So we had 5 keynotes over the course of 81 sessions according to the .conf website itself, but in their sessions, I'm not quite sure whether they're missing. There were a number of special guest sessions. I think Rennick, famous ethical hacker, had Tony Hawk. Sorts of cool guests talking about their
Andrew, I think you're lagging too much. I don't know if it's coming through to everyone like that.
Yeah, unfortunately, so getting.
Yes. I would suggest, Andrew, if you can hear me, I would suggest if you can try to use 4G, maybe, and maybe we can switch over to Harry to give you time to do that.
Yeah, I'm on my Wi-Fi. I don't know what the heck.
Yeah, you're already.
Yeah, Harry, do you want to take over for me for a while?
Yep. What I'll do is I'll move on to my session. Give you a chance to try and sort out those technical issues, and then we'll hopefully be able to circle back. Sorry about that. What we could also try, Andrew, is you just doing the audio and me running the presentation. So you're doing as little, I guess, upload as possible. So let me just get that shared and we'll proceed. Okay, that should be my second screen presenting. Ilias, is that coming through?
Yep, all good.
Brilliant. Okay, so mission control. Mission control is something that I'm gonna was covered at conf last year very briefly as a kind of beta, and now it's gone GA, so general availability, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that's kind of released about it, and also a big thing being their new plugin framework. So I'm going to cover a little bit about what mission control is, and then I'm going to go into a bit more detail about the plugin framework and what it means. So mission control, sorry, I don't know why that keeps popping up. There we go. Right, there we go. Is fundamentally trying to be a unified security operations platform. So what it means by that is if you've used Splunk's products before, obviously you've got, Splunk Enterprise for search, you've then got Enterprise Security, the scene that sits on top with a load of dashboards and out-of-the-box content. You've then got Phantom off to the side, which does case management, workflow, playbooks, and is the place that you kind of expect your analysts to often be doing a whole bunch of work with regard to actually driving incidents and triaging tickets. But you can also do that in enterprise security. And so, essentially Splunk started to get a little bit disparate where information might be, which is ironic for a big data platform. So enter mission control, and mission control is essentially trying to be almost a manager of monitors and takes some of the features from enterprise security, from Phantom, and in the roadmap from UBA, so user behavior analytics, Splunk's UBA tool, and tries to put them in one place. So mission control is not Splunk Enterprise on the back end. What it is it's drawing from a bunch of other locations into a singular workflow and view. Okay, so it's been designed from the ground up. It's not just a fancy dashboard. It is a completely rebuilt cloud native application. So it's not just, Splunk Enterprise running in the cloud. This is a truly, cloud natively designed and built platform. And so what it does is it ties in to all the different components within the Splunk security portfolio. And if these work, yep. So for example, it will essentially tie in over Splunk's REST API to your SIEM, to Splunk Enterprise, whether that's on-prem or on cloud. It will tie in and it will aggregate and pull back things like notable events and anything that they think are relevant for a security analyst or incident responder, etc., to have at their fingertips. It will also integrate into SOAR, so Phantom, for actually taking action, the response automations and so on. It will do that again if you've got Phantom on-prem. But something they're also building is having that built into mission control itself. So you actually don't need Phantom. You would instead put that automation into mission control. What it's now doing, and this is the big announcement, so to speak, is the plugin framework. So if the first year was all about, essentially integrating with Splunk's own security tooling, this big plugin framework push is about integrating with your existing security tools. So endpoint, network security, CASB, threat intelligence. These are essentially software that Splunk doesn't make. So, you're likely to have gone elsewhere for them. Now, if you have, of course, you don't want to end up with disparate data. You don't want to end up with all these different logins, all these different interfaces to try and detect and respond to threat activity. And so, for example, some of the early adopters of this, you've got CrowdStrike for endpoint security. Adama are a partner of them, so we've seen them in a number of our customers. You've got network security products like Vectra, And these are just examples. So these are some of Splunk's initial partners that have adopted the plugin framework, enabling you to use all of these tools, but from within Mission Control. So, for example, if that's endpoint security, you're in Mission Control, you get an alert saying that you have the possibility of a ransomware attack on one of your endpoints. From within Mission Control, you can go into that event, go, action, endpoint, contain, and you leveraging CrowdStrike's API, Mission Control will tell CrowdStrike, which is running on that endpoint, go and contain this process and put it in your sandbox. So no, you're not pivoting to another interface, to another piece of software where you may have forgotten your login details. It's all within that standard SOC interface, which I think is pretty cool. From my days of being a security analyst, I think at the time we all had encrypted spreadsheets with 60 plus credentials, because it was an absolute nightmare with a sprawling enterprise estate of tools to remember credentials. We didn't have the option of password managers that long ago. So this is, again, essentially a sneak peek of the types of plugins that are envisioned for the next, I think, 6 months going into next year. And it just gives you an idea on the investment that these various partners are making to make sure they work with Mission Control, such as the vision for the platform. Key things for me are things, like recorded futures is the tip, PCS for AWS, and indeed Tenable, being able to have your vulnerability management. So again, within your analyst workflow, you see a device and it's got an alert saying it might be vulnerable to, say, the Apache Struts vulnerability. And you've even potentially on your network intrusion system seen activity that might look like someone's trying to take advantage of it. Being able to hover over that asset and go run, ad hoc vulnerability scan to say, am I still vulnerable? Because the vulnerability data could be a month old, and getting that again within the same interface, orchestrated for you. I think it's pretty cool. So pretty much covered this. That the fundamental component here is accepting that within security we're always going to have a broad ecosystem of tooling. We're never going to be able to go to just a one vendor, even if they do play across many different verticals of tooling. Therefore, ideally for security operations, you want a singular interface though to talk to all those tools. And so this fundamentally should, if implemented correctly, make your security operations teams far more agile. It enables them to respond quicker using the tools at their disposal, rather than having to remember, oh well, what tool goes where, what key do I need, etc. It also pushes people down what I'd say guardrails, so actually knowing what is approved within the process for security operations to actually do. There are tools like Tachyon or Tanium, for example, which are endpoint agents, which essentially give you almost unlimited execution capability on endpoints, from removing the entire endpoint's file partitions through to containment of processes or just basic reporting of status. Now, you don't necessarily want to expose all of that raw power to anyone who's authorized to log into it. By essentially saying within Mission Control, these actions are built into the playbook, and these are the only actions outside of, break glass or an incident that you can run as an analyst as part of your workflow. So you're not depending on huge amounts of training for the individual. Instead, what you're depending upon is the tooling to provide those guardrails, to only provide the pre-approved options to, conduct containment, eradication, or recovery. The plugin integration points go way beyond just the responsive capabilities. It also enables you to bring in lots of additional contextual information from a dashboarding perspective. So if you have a dashboard, let's say you've got multiple SIEMs, multiple instances of ES or Splunk Enterprise, you can now pull them into one place, pull in the individual panels. And again, it's the same code base. It's not, again, just duplicating the SPL. It's just embedded through that plugin framework. The analyst queue. So again, this is enabling the ability to extend the workflow tooling that comes out of the box. So a number of different workflows are included out of the box with the mission control, just as they are in Phantom. But this enables you to extend it yourself and do so programmatically, not just, in the WYSIWYG controls within the interface. It enables you to say, this is, the Adama plugin for incident response and workflow, and this is then some code you can maintain and deploy, possibly even to multiple mission controls, depending on what we're doing for different customers. And of course, the benefits for you is that you get to directly customize it to your business requirements. And the same goes for investigations. So again, if you've got standard playbooks or forensic steps you go through, again, stuff comes out of the box with the mission control, but you can extend it and, have that rich capability to build in. For example, I think they pulled in, they built a plugin for MITRE ATT&CK, instantly enabling you to, within your investigation, say, we think we can see evidence of this technique, and it would pull in all the relevant attack information for you directly into the interface, not copy and pasting and none of that, just a live API query based on the plugin framework straight to MITRE ATT&CK's GitHub repository, where it pulled in the live JSON straight into your interface and then stored it there for later review. So in the sales term, right, is it's a new wave of security operations. For me, it's not necessarily new. The idea of a single pane of glass has existed for a long time, but every tool tried to be its own proprietary pane of glass. And the whole point behind mission control is that, of course, the actual interface itself is proprietary, but the plugin framework, which is open and documented, and just like with Splunk add-ons or Splunk apps and Splunk base, Splunk's enabling you as individuals, organizations, or partners to take advantage of it, to integrate with your own tools, your own processes, your own ways of reporting, rather than forcing you to go down a specific prescriptive interface or way of working. And that, to me, is where the value is. So common work surface, or common interface, which I think is great. I hate the term swivel chair security, but I think you understand what it means. Trying to bring it all into one place. So this is at the moment, by the way, a SaaS only offering, meaning that you cannot self-host mission control. So that is a caveat, and that is something they're working to bring into the product, but it will integrate with on-prem infrastructure. So although the actual mission control work surface is cloud only, hosted by Splunk, it will integrate with on-premise Splunk Enterprise Security, UBA, etc. And finally, the plugin framework, just as I just mentioned, it is vendor agnostic. You have to obviously take advantage of it. I'm sure Splunk will work with key partners to bring in integrations that are popular. But fundamentally, you're the master of your own destiny. If there's a technology you've invested heavily in, and hopefully they have an API and they're a relatively open company, like I believe Splunk are, it enables you to build in that integration, whether it's just for a small, pop-up, right-click, run action, or whether it's something far more complex, like the ability to, essentially control, the majority of CrowdStrike's features, but from within mission control. So pulling in their own, I believe, from a roadmap perspective, if these things are openly developed, you would actually potentially just be able to bring in parts of the interface from partner technology directly into mission control, which is really cool. Fundamentally, if you want to go and read more, as always, it's documented. The plugin framework is beta. Mission control itself is generally available. So I highly recommend having a look through the docs. It's got the documentation again in beta for how to develop a plugin, so you can actually see the complexity involved, and it's got a lot of information on the mission control API as well. So not only getting mission control to talk to partner software, but the other way around as well, which I think is pretty cool. So I think that is it. This is just a bunch of stuff that sessions from Conf. So obviously Confs have been and gone, but these are all hosted on Splunk's website for Conf, so check those out. And happy to share these slides, by the way. If you've not managed to take note of anything, just let me know. And I think that's it. So any questions about mission control?
Is there any cost associated with it, Harry?
So my understanding, and I'm not a Splunk sales rep, is that if you have enterprise security or Phantom, you automatically, I think, get an entitlement with mission control. If you don't, then I think it's charged, and I think per seat basis.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
That's my understanding. Because essentially, it's not a really heavy application in the sense that it's not storing terabytes of data, because you're doing that in Splunk Enterprise. So all it is that common interface. So the cost for Splunk is obviously building that integration, building that interface, but the underlying costs for data collection, storage, processing is still within Splunk Core, Splunk Enterprise Security. Any other questions? Okay, well, you all know where to reach me if you do have some, so please do reach out. I wouldn't consider myself an expert on mission control yet because it's relatively new, but I'll do my best to find out answers or point you in the right direction. So Andrew/Ilias, I don't know, Andrew, if you're back with us yet, if you want to do yours.
Yeah, I should be, but I can't control the slides anymore.
Okay, that's not a problem. Well, let me get us back to where you were, and then I'll hand back over to you. So I believe we were here.
Yeah. So yeah, conf had a lot of virtual events happening because obviously due to the current climate, we couldn't have conf in Vegas. So just go to the next slide. So and there were a number of major announcements at the conference. First, one of the major ones appeared to be Splunk's new cloud-first approach, where they will develop all the brand new features for Splunk Cloud first, and then distribute it to enterprise and on-premises as the development goes. And the other major announcement was the expansion of the observability suite, which I believe used to be the DevOps option platform that they were targeting. So they've acquired Plumber, which is a performance management platform for Java and .NET profiling to look at bytecode performance, for example. And they've put in the intent to acquire Rigor, which does the same for web monitoring. And since Conf, they've put an intent to acquire Flowmill about 2 or 3 weeks ago, which is a cloud observability platform. Next slide, please. So the major announcement for Splunk Cloud is that it's now generally available on the Google Cloud Platform. So there's a number of regions that you can deploy Splunk into. I believe there's one in the UK, for example, and should be a couple in the US, but I can't remember off the top of my head where all the locations are. They have a brand new version of Data Stream Processor, which I will talk about in a couple of slides' time. And that's going to be available to Splunk Cloud customers first, and then should make its way down into the on-premises enterprise. Splunk Cloud is supporting tenants with over 100 terabytes worth of data a day. So the scalability that they've managed to produce over the last couple of years has been leaps and bounds. And the final point, which is kind of cool, is you don't have to get Splunk support to install private apps or the majority of Splunk-based apps anymore. Personally, I've never done this process myself, but it apparently is one of these things that the wider ecosystem was asking the ability for. Next slide, please. So on top of the brand new announcements for Splunk Cloud, Splunk Enterprise 8.1 was also released, and both that and Splunk Cloud got a couple of new features. So the first one that they liked pointing out is a global banner. So if you imagine every Splunk page that your organization owns can have a little banner on the top of every single page with like instructions or comments. So like an example could be if in your development or pre-prod environment, you can have a little like blue banner saying this is the dev or pre-prod environment. I've got my own little banner on my personal instance saying never use join on input lookup, just to joke about that. But you can put whatever text you want in that little banner. They also provided native commenting. So rather than using macro, you can now use, I think it was 3 backticks in order to put comments into your SPL in line. And it doesn't matter if it's on a new line or if it's actually between statements itself. Like you can have a stats command and do all your sort of values and then have a comment and then have your by command, I believe. So that's now native. You don't have to have a macro doing that anymore. And there's a more advanced history navigator where you can use keyboard shortcuts to travel back and forth through your history navigation, so you don't lose your place when you're editing SPL. Google Cloud Platform support for Smart Store now, so you can now, as well as using AWS, use that for Smart Store indexes. I don't know if it should be generally available through 8.1, but it might be one of these features where it's more fleshed out on Splunk Cloud because it's now on Google itself. And there's been a bunch of improvements with Smart Store itself. Table view improvements. So this sort of replaces pivot tables in Splunk, where you can essentially create queries using a drop-down list of menus. So if you have someone who's not that strong with SPL, but they have a general idea of what data they want to look at, you can let them go into the table view and they should be able to create a relatively simple query without too much issue. It's essentially just click options in a drop-down list. Ingest time lookups. So you can set up data enrichment at ingest time. For example, if you have a correlation search with IP addresses in your events and you have a lookup table with the asset with that IP address in it, you can do an ingest time lookup and enrich that event with that asset ID. So you don't have to do that at search time, for example, or if it's a time constraint lookup, for example, where the lookup may change when you get around to actually searching for that data. So that's cool. And then you also have HTTP out over universal forwarders, so you essentially get HEC compatibility with UFs, and this is really useful for putting data into cloud. Next slide. So this is one of the coolest sort of announcements, the Splunk machine learning environment, or SMILE as they call it. So if you imagine being able to use Splunk commands using SPL2, which is a brand new version of the query language that was sort of introduced quietly last year with Splunk Investigate, that allows extra data options such as doing joins in an SQL manner rather than the SPL way. If you imagine that plus the power of using machine learning frameworks in a Jupyter notebook, if you're experienced in any form of data science like that, you can create essentially mashups of data scientists plus Splunk users and engineers to produce a lot of cool machine learning outcomes. I think the example that they gave is some sort of time variant data frame or something along those lines. I can't quite remember off the top of my head, but it was really cool to look at. And through that, you can export your data model that you, the machine learning model that you produce as part of it, and you can actually apply that to the data stream processor, which I'll get onto in the next slide. The next slide itself is just an image of like the UI that you get when you log in, but if I was able to click through that, you would see if you know what a Jupyter notebook is essentially code snippets in your website, and it's got a processor in the back end that runs that snippet of code or SPL search and produces an output, and then you can take the results of that output and continue working on it through many functions. It is really cool to see that coming in. Next slide. So is now up 1.2. It's going to be available for Splunk Cloud first. It's now got support for multi-cloud. So not just AWS, you can now do GCP pub sub subscriptions through DSP. Like I mentioned before, you can enrich data on the fly using lookups. The example here that is on the slide is a phantom action, for example, to geolocate an IP address and then enrich it into your Splunk event. And in theory, you can update your lookup on the fly as well. So if you have like an asset inventory lookup, instead of having to do periodic searches across your data to populate your lookup, you just do it at ingest time using DSP, which is quite cool.
Andrew, I just wanted to point something out there that I found really interesting about the use case for data enrichment kind of prior to storage within Splunk or wherever you're going to store it. Because a lot of people kind of go, well, why would I actually change my raw event or add to my underlying raw event? And when you start to look at the more advanced or mature detective controls you want to deploy, or I'm sure in other domains this applies as well, you actually want a lot of your contextual data, including, for example, IP reputation, within the detection itself. You don't want to wait for an alert, then to go into Phantom, to then get more context, to then have a human go, oh, well, that changes things. You ideally want to do that, really early on in the process, so that you straight away it's coming in at a higher priority, or that you're able to give the analyst context immediately, rather than waiting for even automated actions that could take a few minutes. And I just thought that was really worth pointing out, that by essentially having a data processing pipeline, you can add context in the fly, meaning that that's baked into the raw data so that your detective controls can run against them.
Yeah, certainly. Like at the client I work at, I can foresee using enrichment for security cases such as that, or just access controls and things like that. There's a lot of possibilities that you can have by just enriching data out with having to run searches far later than the DSP can enrich it. And then you also have a streaming machine learning capability. So the models that I was talking about a couple of slides earlier can be applied as part of the DSP pipeline. So I think last year they were talking about semantic, the analysis of the text content within a tweet, for example. But now you can build time series models or outlier detection or pattern detection within your DSP pipeline. And that could have more cool functionality in that regard. I'll recommend looking at the presentations about this, because it's really cool sort of technology. And then finally, a bunch of other announcements on the next slide. So there's a brand new operator for Kubernetes, so you can just deploy and scale via a Kubernetes cluster. Splunk TVs had an upgrade, so you can put it on a Android TV and Fire TV now, as well as Apple TV. And what they've done, due to the change in working conditions, is allow a master controller to send dashboards to what a group of TVs, and it doesn't have to be on the same network. It could be your SOC could be sitting in their own rooms at the moment, and their TV could be updated with the relevant dashboard going by the person who's controlling the setup. So that's quite cool. Splunk VR and AR. So virtual reality is now generally available. You can put on your Oculus Rift headset and walk through a virtual room and see 3D visualizations, which is quite cool.
Does it look like Minority Report? That's all I want to know.
Not yet, because Minority Reports sort of blends in with current. That's more of a mixed reality, although there is mixed reality options for Splunk within the AR capabilities.
Nice. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, and augmented reality allows for remote collaboration. There was a cool demo that they did where a customer has a drone out of the middle of nowhere, and he connects to a helpline operator, and the helpline operator asks them to open up the app which connects to Splunk, and essentially does a 3D scan of an object of his drone with relevant Phantom automation triggers around the model, and he just hits a playbook as part of the triage and updates the firmware. So that was quite a cool sort of demonstration. And then there's also a mixed reality one where he goes to a server rack and looks at the performance of the server rack based on visual cues. Like, you don't need to scan a barcode anymore. You can do image recognition to work out what it should be displaying as dashboards, and then he leaves a virtual note for the next person to come along using Splunk within a 3D space. So that was quite cool. And then the final announcement was Splunk Mobile now supports old standard dashboarding. So Trellis, which was introduced 2 years ago, I think, is now supported on Splunk Mobile. So on the next slide, I've just put down a bunch of recommended sessions that I actually attended. There's quite a few security-focused ones. The second one, the SPL2 Magic, that's got a lot of the machine learning environment. So that one's a cool one if you want to look at that. And then I would really recommend looking at anything that the Splunk Trust put out, because a lot of their presentations were more technical than some of the higher level presentations that you sometimes got, like understanding the job inspector, understanding how to write SPL properly without using a lot of joins, which is a major bugbear with me. So yeah, I would highly recommend having a look for some of these sessions. So does anybody have any questions about that? I am conscious of time, and we do have Ilias having to speed run talking about Phantom. Take that as a no, so we can move on to Ilias then.
Yeah, and Ilias, did you want to share the slides directly? Do you want me to drive?
Yeah, I'll share.
Brilliant, thanks.
So that should be it. Where is it? Here.
Yep, got you.
What can you actually see? Is it the presenter's note or the?
No, you can see the right version, the full screen.
Oh, right, okay. Because it's on my second screen. Okay, yep, so don't have a lot of time left, but it's not that I have way too many things to report on. It's but there are some really cool features in Phantom. But first of all, I should introduce myself. Yeah, I'm Ilias. I'm a security consultant in Dharma, and I have worked extensively with Splunk and now Phantom, as I've led the SOAR implementation of our managed SOC service using Phantom in the last year. So I've basically kind of lived and breathed Phantom, and I've also upgraded recently to Phantom 4.8. So I've seen all these features that I'm going to talk about quite closely. I'll skip this slide, as these are all kind of the new features that we'll look at in the next slides. So one of the major new features are the custom function enhancements. Basically, they've introduced a new custom function where it's basically just a Python function, which has structured inputs and outputs, and then within your playbook you can basically call that Python function as a block and provide inputs and outputs using the normal data path. So like the UI things that you fill in, these get passed into the Python function. It runs whatever you've coded and then provides your outputs. So they're really useful because some repetitive things that you would do using potentially the old custom blocks, you now can use the custom function. So I'll get into that in a minute. So stuff that you can do is process data, maybe clean up, or even interact with Phantom, as Phantom does have many out-of-the-shelf API blocks, but they're not all of them. So you can now extend it on your own. I've already spoke about the old custom blocks. Basically, they're now called legacy, and they were to be deprecated, but they will not, because people actually found it useful. I find it still useful because you still need to be able to have that sort of extra control by adding a block. The idea is that the custom function is something that's repeatable, like a module that you frequently use across all your playbooks, and it's sort of independent, like polymorphic. So the actual custom block, you might need to actually do something that's really specific to your playbook, and there's no point really exposing it to other playbooks. So that's kind of the difference. And then, of course, the new custom functions are version controlled. They're basically a Python file with the accompanying JSON file that just has some metadata inside. So you can version control them as you can playbooks as well. So the cool thing about this is also that some of the things that you need to do with a playbook in a kind of normal way, and by normal I mean adding blocks rather than hacking Python code, it just reduces the amount of steps that you need to take every time you, for instance, wanted to do a REST call within Phantom. So within Phantom, I mean to Phantom's own API. So basically this top becomes like this bottom, just one block that does all these using Python, which gives you a bit more control than just using blocks. And that means that you can use this assign workbook, for instance, function in multiple playbooks. And if you didn't have that, then in your multiple playbooks, you would need to do every time the one at the top, which just gives much more room for errors. Because if you just keep repeating stuff, even if you copy paste or clone, you might just make a mistake. So if you've tested your custom function, then you know it will work on all playbooks, well, bugs aside. So this is how a custom function looks like. As I said, it's basically a Python function. Here it's the one called create task. So create task is something that we were personally missing from the out-of-the-box API integrations from within Phantom. So it creates a task within Phantom, and it actually uses, if you see it in line 34, it uses actually Phantom API function that was just not exposed. So on the left is, you can see the kind of structure that I was talking about, the inputs and outputs. In this case, we have two inputs, and you can use either of these, and that's totally up to you. If you want to have required inputs, if you want to have optional inputs. Here we're really kind of making this simple, where you can just pass a JSON to this task, and it will create the task with all the JSON information that you passed. For instance, task name, task description, potential notes that you've put in the task, that sort of thing. What's actually also really cool is on the left again, you'll see this associated playbooks, which shows you where you're using this custom function. So here we're using it in two playbooks. So I've already kind of spoke about some of the benefits. It's reducing the kind of duplication in the many blocks. One other thing that's really neat is that if you're not on an unlimited actions license, you're also reducing the amount of actions that you're actually doing, especially if you're integrating with your own Phantom, because the HTTP adds an action count, but if you use a custom function that integrates using Python, using Python API calls, it doesn't actually count as an action. So obviously, the whole point here is that the sky's the limit, and now that you have that modularity in place, you can do whatever you want. And as I said earlier, inputs and outputs are there to help you integrate with your playbook, but you can manipulate them however you want, or you can do your own input checking, for instance. Next, not exactly a feature, but I mean, it is, because Python 3 is definitely better than Python 2. Not obvious to people who haven't really developed like deeply complex stuff, such as threads and that sort of stuff. But obviously Python 2 was phased out, and right now Phantom is working towards that, and they're 2/3 of the process. So basically, the only thing that's missing is that actual playbooks are still Python 2, but the actual platform runs in Python 3 as well as apps. So it's probably in the next upgrade that's gonna switch to a whole Python 3 approach. Another major thing that was observed in 4.8 was if you have too many events and Phantom runs a lot of actions, there's this thing called kind of a concurrency locking mechanism that Phantom has, where basically when it's doing an action, it kind of locks that specific asset. And there's a limit on how many accounts that lock can keep, and it was hard limit, and now it can be configured. Obviously, the limit is there to help performance, but if that limit was reached, we would see actions failing because they couldn't acquire a lock. So that's really good that now this is a setting that can be changed. Next, we have Markdown introduction. So that's purely for nodes within Phantom. So either nodes that analyst write or nodes that automation writes. It used to only be HTML and very, very limited HTML, such as a line or a bullet list, that sort of stuff. But now with Markdown, you have a little bit more color with obviously you're able to do bold, strike through. You can add code, a code block. You can add tables, which at the moment are still a bit limited, but it's definitely a step towards the right direction. Another really important thing with images, so that's super useful because you couldn't really add screenshots beforehand. And HTML is still supported, though it's not the default, but it's something that you can change while creating a node through your playbook or even through the UI. So, and in the first slide, there were a couple more features. There's a PostgreSQL update, which is the database that Phantom uses, and it's quite a significant upgrade, especially in performance. With that, the UI was also optimized. So both with the database being upgraded and the UI, it's now much more snappier than it used to be. Another kind of minor thing, but pretty important, especially for whoever has a license, is that the admin account doesn't count towards that seat, which was kind of, let's say, unfair. Then another interesting thing is that Phantom actually uses Splunk either externally or internally. If you use it externally, you now have the ability to segregate what data you want to for each of your Splunk to have, if you have multiple Splunks. And you can also separate them by a kind of prefix into the index for each platform. So it just gives more control of how your data is segregated. Lastly, for developers, again, they have a new API for decision, which is like the if-else within the playbook. It used to be really annoying that if you had a playbook that operated on a container that didn't have artifacts, it will always default to the else. Now artifacts aren't important for what decision was made. I think it was kind of a bug, to be honest, and they fixed that, but it's quite significant, as you don't really need to add some sort of dummy artifact or something like that. And the reason you would want a container without artifacts is, for instance, if you have some sort of playbooks that do something internal for you that don't really need to necessarily act upon an artifact, such as something that cleans up or something that monitors and doesn't really need an artifact, but still has some Boolean logic behind it. So, yep. So that's basically the updates that I want to give. Major thing is obviously the custom function, which just enables software engineering practices and reduces the duplication, just adds that modularity, which makes it much better for errors and overhead of work. Markdown is a really good step towards a direction of being able to present information in a much neater way, and that's really important, and of course bug fixes overall, which come with every upgrade. So that's it from me. What questions do you have? All right, back to you, Harry.
Thanks, Ilias. So that concludes the virtual Splunk user group. We've overrun slightly, so thank you very much for sticking around. Appreciate it. If you've got any suggestions for our next one, which will of course be next year, please do let us know. We try to make the topics interesting, but obviously we are only a few people, so any insights either you want to share yourself or you'd like us to try and source, we'll do our best to. We'll probably do another one in February, March kind of time frame, and obviously you'll be notified of that. So thank you very much to Andrew and to Ilias for speaking, and Andrew for organising. Please do reach out with any feedback. Always happy to hear it, and have a great Christmas and New Year. Thanks all.
Bye-bye.
Cheers very much, guys.
Yeah.
Right, bye everyone.